Some secrets hide in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to discover them. In the golden towers of Dubai, where wealth glitters like desert stars and power reshapes destiny, a young woman named Elena Martinez stepped into a world she could never have imagined. She came seeking only honest work to support her family back in Texas. But what she found in the marble halls of Sheikh Rashid al-Mansouri's palatial estate would unravel a mystery that had haunted her for 7 long years. Sometimes the truth we seek has been watching us all along, and sometimes the answers to our deepest questions come from the most unexpected places. This is a story of 2 hearts, bound by loss, separated by circumstance, and brought together by fate's invisible hand. A tale of love that transcends borders, grief that transforms into hope, and the courage it takes to face the shadows of our past. The private jet descended through clouds that looked like spun sugar, and Elena pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching Dubai emerge below like a mirage made real. At 67, she had never imagined she would leave San Antonio, much less fly halfway around the world to work as a housemaid. But life had a way of pushing you toward roads you never planned to travel. Her arthritis made the long flight uncomfortable, but she bore it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through decades of cleaning houses in wealthy neighborhoods, raising her daughter alone, and surviving the unspeakable loss of her younger sister Carmen. The city below sprawled in geometric perfection, glass towers catching the afternoon sun like captured lightning. Elena clutched her worn leather purse, the one Carmen had given her 30 years ago, and whispered a prayer her mother had taught her. The agency had been clear. Sheikh Rashid al-Mansouri needed a mature, experienced housekeeper for his primary residence, someone trustworthy and discreet. The salary was more than Elena had earned in 3 years of work back home, enough to finally pay for her daughter Rosa's surgery, enough to stop the bank from taking her small house. She had hesitated for only a moment before accepting. What did she have to lose? Her husband had passed 5 years ago, Rosa was grown with her own family, and the loneliness of her empty house had begun to feel like a living thing. Perhaps a change of scenery, however drastic, was exactly what her weary heart needed. The agency representative, a crisp British woman named Mrs. Whitmore, had shown her photographs of the estate, a modern palace of white stone and endless windows overlooking the Persian Gulf. The Sheikh is very private, Mrs. Whitmore had warned. He values discretion above all else. A driver met Elena at the airport, a young Emirati man who spoke perfect English and helped her with her single suitcase. As they drove through the city, Elena marveled at the impossible. Architecture, buildings that seemed to defy gravity and reason. But nothing prepared her for the moment. The car turned through massive iron gates, and the Sheikh's estate came into view. It rose from manicured gardens like a sculpture of light and shadow. 3 stories of pristine white stone with balconies that overlooked fountains and palm trees. The driver explained that the Sheikh was away on business in London, but would return in 3 days. Elena would have time to settle in, learn the household routines, and meet the small staff, a cook, a gardener, and a driver. As she stepped from the car, the desert heat embraced her like a familiar friend, reminding her of summer afternoons in Texas. She didn't know then that within these beautiful walls, she would find the answer to a question that had broken her heart 7 years ago. The interior of the mansion took Elena's breath away. Marble floors gleamed like frozen water, and soaring ceilings were painted with geometric patterns that seemed to move in the changing light. A grand staircase curved upward like a ribbon, and everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of wealth beyond imagination. Crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs that felt like clouds beneath her feet, artwork that belonged in museums. Yet despite all this opulence, there was a strange emptiness to the place, a silence that felt intentional. Mrs. Amira, the head of household staff, was a kind-faced Egyptian woman in her 50s who showed Elena to her quarters, a suite larger than Elena's entire house back home, with a private bathroom and a balcony overlooking the gardens. "The Sheikh is a good man," Mrs. Amira said softly, "but he carries great sadness. You will see this. Do not ask questions. Simply do your work with care." For 2 days, Elena learned her duties. She was responsible for the private wing of the mansion, the Sheikh's bedroom suite, his study, a library that held thousands of books in Arabic, English, and French, and several guest rooms. Mrs. Amira taught her exactly how everything should be maintained, which cleaners to use on which surfaces, how the Sheikh preferred his linens, the precise arrangement of items on his desk. Elena worked with the same meticulous attention she had brought to every job in her life. She found a strange peace in the routine, in the quiet mornings when sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, in the late afternoons when she could rest on her balcony and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and rose. She thought often of Carmen during those quiet moments, wondered if her sister would have loved this view, this unexpected adventure. Carmen had always been the brave one, the dreamer. On the third morning, as Elena was dusting the bookshelves in the library, she noticed something unusual. Behind a first edition of Rumi's poetry, partially hidden, was a photograph in a simple silver frame. The frame had been turned to face the wall, as if someone had deliberately concealed it. Elena's hands trembled as she gently turned it around, and what she saw made her heart stop. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, standing on a beach somewhere, wearing a white sundress that the wind caught and lifted. The woman was beautiful, radiant with joy, and Elena knew her face as well as she knew her own. It was Carmen, her baby sister Carmen, who had disappeared 7 years ago without a trace, who had been living in Dubai and suddenly stopped answering calls, whose case the police had eventually closed as a voluntary disappearance. Elena's legs gave out, and she sank into the leather chair beside the bookshelf, clutching the photograph to her chest, tears streaming down her weathered face. What was Carmen's picture doing hidden in Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri's library? Elena's mind spun with possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. Had Carmen worked here? Had something terrible happened to her in this house? Was this wealthy, powerful man somehow responsible for her sister's disappearance? For 7 years, Elena had lived with the agony of not knowing, had filed missing person reports, had hired a private investigator she couldn't afford, had prayed every night for some sign that Carmen was alive. The police in Dubai had found nothing, no body, no evidence of foul play, no trail to follow. Carmen had simply vanished from her rented apartment in the Marina district, leaving behind all her belongings, her passport, her phone. And now, here was her photograph, hidden like a secret shame in the home of one of the wealthiest men in the Emirates. Elena's grief transformed into something harder, sharper. She would find out the truth. She would finally know what had happened to her beloved Carmen. That afternoon, when Mrs. Amira came to check on her work, Elena made a decision. She placed the photograph back exactly as she had found it, facing the wall, hidden behind the poetry book. She would not reveal what she had discovered, not yet. Instead, she would wait for the Sheikh to return, would watch him, would find a way to ask him directly about the photograph. Mrs. Amira had said he carried great sadness. Was it guilt? Was Carmen's disappearance the source of his sorrow? Elena's hands shook as she polished the mahogany desk in the study, and she found herself looking at everything with new eyes. What other secrets did this mansion hold? She explored more carefully now, opening drawers she had previously left closed, examining photographs on walls and shelves, but there were no other pictures of Carmen, no other clues, just that one hidden photograph, turned to the wall as if the Sheikh could not bear to look at it, but could not throw it away either. That night, Elena could not sleep. She stood on her balcony in her nightgown, looking up at stars that seemed different here, arranged in patterns she didn't recognize. She thought about the last time she had spoken to Carmen, a video call on Christmas Eve 7 years ago. Carmen had been so excited, talking about her new job at an art gallery, about the amazing city she was discovering, about a man she had met, a kind man who loved poetry and made her laugh. "He's so different from anyone back home, Elena," Carmen had said, her eyes sparkling. "He's teaching me about his culture, his language." I think I'm falling in love. Elena had been happy for her sister, had told her to be careful, but to follow her heart. 2 weeks later, Carmen was gone. The gallery said she had stopped showing up for work. Her landlord said she had paid 3 months' rent in advance and then disappeared. And Elena had been left with nothing but questions and a grief that grew heavier with each passing year. Sheikh Rashid al-Mansouri returned on a Thursday evening, and Elena heard the commotion from her room. Cars pulling up to the entrance, voices in Arabic, footsteps on marble floors. Her heart raced with nervous energy. She had practiced what she would say, how she would approach him, but now that the moment was near, fear gripped her. What if he was dangerous? What if confronting him put her own life at risk? But the need to know the truth was stronger than her fear. The next morning, Mrs. Amira instructed her to prepare tea and bring it to the Sheikh's study at 10 o'clock. Elena's hands trembled as she arranged the tea service on a silver tray, a pot of mint tea, a small plate of dates, a cup of English breakfast tea as well, as the Sheikh apparently liked both. She looked at her reflection in the polished silver and saw an old woman with grey hair and tired eyes, but also someone who had survived loss and hardship. She had courage. Carmen would want her to be brave. She knocked softly on the study door, and a deep voice called out in English, "Enter." Elena pushed the door open with her hip, balancing the tray carefully. The Sheikh stood at the window with his back to her, a tall figure in traditional white robes, looking out at the gardens below. Even from behind, he emanated a presence that filled the room. Power, certainly, but also something else. A weariness that seemed to weigh down his broad shoulders. "Your tea, sir," Elena said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. He turned slowly, and she saw his face for the first time. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and beard, deep-set eyes that held decades of stories, and features that would have been handsome if not for the profound sadness that seemed carved into them. His eyes met hers, and for a moment something flickered in them, recognition perhaps, or simply curiosity about the new member of his household staff. "You are Elena," he said, and it wasn't a question. His English was impeccable, touched with a British accent. "Mrs. Whitmore told me about you. I hope you are finding everything satisfactory." Elena placed the tray on his desk, her mind racing. She had planned to wait, to learn more before confronting him, but having him here in front of her, the words burst out before she could stop them. "I found a photograph in your library," she said, her voice breaking. "A photograph of a young woman, my sister, Carmen Martinez." She watched his face carefully, looking for guilt, for fear, for any sign of what he might have done. But what she saw instead shocked her. The Sheikh's face crumbled, all his carefully maintained composure falling away like a mask. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white, and when he looked at her again, his eyes were filled with tears. "Carmen," he whispered, the name like a prayer. "You are Carmen's sister." And then, to Elena's astonishment, this powerful man sank into his chair and began to weep. For a long moment, Elena stood, frozen, watching this stranger cry for her sister. All her anger, all her suspicions faltered in the face of such raw grief. She had expected many things: denial, threats, even violence, but not this. Not tears that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. Finally, she moved around the desk and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, the same way she used to comfort Rosa when she was a child. "Tell me," Elena said softly. "Please, I've spent 7 years not knowing what happened to her. Tell me the truth." Rashid looked up at her, his distinguished face wet with tears, and nodded slowly. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I will tell you everything. It is a story I have told no one, a secret that has poisoned my life. Perhaps it is time for the truth to finally come into the light." Rashid stood and walked to a cabinet, retrieving 2 glasses and a bottle of water. His hands shook slightly as he poured. When he sat again, he looked older, somehow, as if the weight of his secret had been the only thing holding him upright. "I met Carmen 7 years ago at an art exhibition," he began, his voice rough with emotion. I had gone reluctantly, only because a business associate insisted. I was 43 years old, recently divorced, and I had believed my heart was no longer capable of love. And then I saw her, standing in front of a painting, completely absorbed in it. She was so beautiful, but more than that, she was alive. In a way I had forgotten was possible. She turned and smiled at me, and I felt my frozen heart crack open. Elena's own eyes filled with tears as she listened. This matched what Carmen had told her, a man she met at a gallery, a kind man who loved art and poetry. We began to see each other, Rashid continued, staring down at his hands. Secretly, always secretly, not because I was ashamed of her, but because of my family, my position in society. My father was still alive then, traditional in all ways, and he would never have accepted that I loved an American woman who was not Muslim, who was from a different world. I told myself we would find a way, that I would convince my father in time. Carmen was patient with me. She understood the complexities. For 6 months we loved each other in secret. We would meet at her apartment, or I would take her on my boat to quiet islands where no one would see us. She taught me how to laugh again, how to see beauty in simple things. I had never known such happiness. His voice broke and he paused to gather himself. Elena waited, her heart pounding, sensing that the terrible truth was approaching. We planned to marry, Rashid said, and a sob escaped him. Carmen had agreed to convert to Islam, not because I demanded it, but because she had studied and found beauty in the faith. We were going to announce our engagement to my family and face whatever consequences came. But first, I had to tell my father. I went to him one evening, to his house where he lived in the old city, and I told him I had fallen in love with an American woman. I showed him her photograph. I explained that she was kind and good, that she wanted to learn our ways, that I would not live without her. Rashid's face twisted with anguish. My father was enraged. He said I was bringing shame to our family, that he would rather see me dead than married to a Western woman. He said terrible things about Carmen and called her terrible names, and then he made a threat that would destroy everything. Elena leaned forward, gripping the arms of her chair. What did he say? Rashid met her eyes, and she saw the torment there. He said that if I married Carmen, he would use his influence to have her deported immediately, that he would ensure she could never return to the Emirates or any country in the region. More than that, he said he would spread lies about her, claim she was involved in theft, in fraud, things that would ruin her reputation forever, that would follow her back to America. My father had those connections, that power. He had done such things before to people who displeased him, and I knew he would do exactly as he threatened. Rashid's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I had to make an impossible choice. Marry the woman I loved and destroy her life. Make it impossible for her to work, to live freely, to ever return to a part of the world she had come to. Love, or let her go and bear the pain alone. You left her, Elena said, and she couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. Rashid nodded miserably. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was protecting her, but I was a coward. I went to her apartment that Christmas, 3 days after I spoke to my father. I told her we couldn't be together, that my family would never accept her, that I had been foolish to think we could overcome the differences between our worlds. I said cruel things, Elena, things I didn't mean but thought would help her move on. I told her I'd been amusing myself, that I had never intended to marry her. I watched her heart break, watched the light go out of her eyes, and I hated myself even as I did it. Tears streamed down his face unchecked. She asked me if any of it had been real, and I said no. I said she should return to America and forget about me, and then I left. I never saw her again. Elena felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her. She thought of her sister's pain, the heartbreak she must have suffered. She disappeared 2 weeks later, Elena said, her voice hollow. Just vanished. The police found nothing. I thought she might be dead. For 7 years, I've lived with not knowing. Rashid's face went pale. Disappeared? What do you mean, disappeared? Elena explained everything, the calls that went unanswered, the police investigation, the empty apartment with all of Carmen's belongings still still inside, the years of searching and hoping and grieving. As she spoke, Rashid's expression shifted from anguish to horror. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no. I thought she went home. I thought she returned to Texas. When I finally allowed myself to search for news of her online months later, I found nothing, but I assumed she had simply gone back to her old life, that she had moved on. I never imagined." He stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. "I have to tell you." "Something?" Rashid said, turning to face her with wild eyes. "After I left Carmen, I fell into darkness. I stopped going to work. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I realized too late what I had thrown away. 3 months after I ended things with her, my father had a stroke. He lived for another year, but he never recovered. And in that year, as I sat by his hospital bed, I understood that I had sacrificed everything, Carmen's happiness and my own, for a man who was already dying, for traditions that were slowly fading away. I tried to find her then. I hired investigators, but they could find no trace of her in America. I thought perhaps she had changed her name, started a new life, wanted nothing to do with memories of Dubai. I kept her photograph, the only one I had, and I hid it because I couldn't bear to look at her face and remember what a fool I had been. But I never imagined she might be missing, might be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the same view Rashid had been contemplating when she entered. Her mind reeled with this new information. Rashid hadn't abandoned Carmen callously. He had thought he was protecting her, had sacrificed his own happiness for hers. It was misguided, foolish even, but it came from love, not cruelty. And he had been suffering all these years too, carrying his own grief and regret. "We have to find out what happened to her," Elena said, her voice stronger now. "If you truly love my sister, if you've been mourning her all this time, then help me find the truth. You have resources I could never have. You know this city, these people. Help me understand what happened to Carmen after you left her." Rashid came to stand beside her at the window, and she could see his reflection in the glass. A man transformed by purpose. "I will use everything I have," he said quietly. "Every resource, every connection. I swear to you, Elena, we will find the truth." Over the following days, Elena and Rashid became unlikely partners in investigation. He reopened the case with a new team of private investigators, offering rewards for any information about Carmen's disappearance. He pulled the old police files using his connections in the government and sat with Elena for hours, going through every detail. They discovered things the original investigation had missed, that Carmen had withdrawn all the money from her bank account 2 days before she disappeared, nearly $10,000, that she had been seen at the airport but no record existed of her boarding a flight, that several of her co-workers at the gallery remembered her seeming distracted and sad in the days before she vanished, but hadn't thought much of it at the time. Elena learned more about Rashid during those long days of searching. She learned that he had never remarried, that he devoted himself to charitable work, building schools and hospitals across the Emirates. She learned that he wrote poetry in Arabic, that he still kept the books Carmen had given him, annotated in her handwriting. "Tell me about her," Rashid said one evening as they sat in his study, surrounded by files and photographs. "Tell me about Carmen as a child, as a sister. I knew her for such a brief time, and I want to know everything." So Elena told him stories. She told him about Carmen's love of art from a young age, how she would draw on every surface she could find. About the time Carmen rescued a stray dog and hid it in their bedroom for 3 days before their mother discovered it. About Carmen's first heartbreak at 16 and how she had sworn she would never fall in love again, a promise she obviously hadn't kept. About Carmen's dreams of traveling the world, of living a life bigger than the small house in San Antonio where they had grown up. "She was brave," Elena said softly, "so much braver than me. She always wanted to fly, and I was content to stay on the ground." Rashid listened to every story with an intensity that moved Elena. She could see how much he had loved her sister, how much he still loved her even after 7 years. One night, he shared his own stories, memories of Carmen laughing at his attempts to teach her Arabic, of her cooking him Texas barbecue on a portable grill on his boat, of the way she would fall asleep reading poetry, the book falling open on her chest. She used to tell me about you, Rashid said quietly. She said you were the strongest person she knew, that you had raised her after your mother died, that you had worked 3 jobs to help her go to college. She loved you so much, Elena. She talked about bringing you to Dubai to visit, about how happy she would be to show you the city she had fallen in love with. Elena wiped tears from her eyes. Hearing these stories was painful, but also healing, proof that Carmen's love had been real, that her last months had held genuine happiness before heartbreak struck. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Elena's discovery of the photograph. One of the investigators called with news. They had found a woman named Fatima Hassan, who had been Carmen's neighbor in the Marina building. Fatima had left Dubai years ago to return to Syria, but they had tracked her down. She remembered Carmen clearly and had information she had never shared with the police because no one had asked the right questions. Rashid arranged an immediate video call, and Elena sat beside him as the screen flickered to life, showing a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair. "I remember Carmen well," Fatima said in accented English. "She was such a sweet girl, always friendly. I saw her the morning she left. She was getting into a taxi with 2 suitcases early in the morning, maybe 5 o'clock. I was surprised because she had never mentioned leaving." "Did she say anything to you?" Elena asked, leaning toward the screen. Fatima shook her head. "No, but I saw something. A piece of paper fell from her purse as she was loading her bags. I picked it up to give it to her, but the taxi drove away before I could. I kept it, thinking she might come back for it, but she never did. Then the police came asking questions, but they never asked about papers or notes, so I didn't think to mention it." Rashid's hands gripped the desk. "Do you still have this? In paper?" Fatima nodded and disappeared from the screen. Elena could barely breathe. After a few moments, Fatima returned, holding a wrinkled piece of paper, which she held up to the camera. It was a note, handwritten in English. Elena recognized her sister's handwriting immediately. Rashid leaned forward and read aloud, "I can't stay in this city anymore. Every street reminds me of him. I'm going somewhere I can start over, somewhere no one will find me. Don't worry about me. This is my choice." Elena felt something break open in her chest. Relief and pain tangled together. "She left on her own," she whispered. "She wasn't taken, wasn't harmed. She chose to disappear." But Rashid was staring at the screen with an odd expression. "Mrs. Hassan, can you see anything else on that paper? Any other writing?" Fatima turned it over, squinting. "Yes, there are some numbers here. Maybe a phone number. And an address, I think. Hard to read." Rashid gave her an email address and asked her to photograph both sides and send them immediately. When the email arrived minutes later, he zoomed in on the images. The address was partially smudged but partially legible. Something in Morocco, a city that looked like it might say Tangier. The phone number had several digits missing, but showed a country code. "She went to Morocco," Rashid said, his voice tight with emotion. "She wanted to disappear, and she chose Morocco." He looked at Elena with eyes full of hope and fear. "We can find her. If she's there, we can find her." That afternoon, Rashid made dozens of phone calls, speaking rapidly in Arabic to contacts across the Middle East and North Africa. Elena watched him transform into someone formidable, a man wielding power and connections like tools, bending the world to his will through sheer determination. He had investigators on the ground in Tangier by evening, showing Carmen's photograph to hotel owners, expatriate communities, anyone who might recognize her. He contacted banks to trace any activity on Carmen's accounts. He even reached out to immigration officials, though they warned that Morocco's records from 7 years ago were incomplete. Elena felt hope building in her chest for the first time since Carmen had vanished, a dangerous, fragile hope that terrified her. What if they found nothing? What if Carmen had moved on from Morocco years ago? What if she was dead after all, despite the note? But Rashid would not let her sink into despair. "We will find her," he said firmly. "If she is anywhere in the world, we will find her. I failed Carmen once by letting her go. I will not fail her again." That night, as Elena lay in bed, unable to sleep, she thought about fate and chance, about the impossible chain of events that had led her here. If she had not needed money desperately, if she had not accepted this job, if she had not found that hidden photograph, she never would have learned what had really happened to Carmen. She never would have met Rashid, never would have understood that her sister's disappearance was not abandonment, but escape, an attempt to outrun heartbreak. In the morning, Elena found Rashid already in his study, looking exhausted but alert. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I keep thinking about her, about what she must have been feeling, how alone she must have felt." "She was strong," Elena said, sitting across from him. "If she made it to Morocco, if she started a new life there, she would have found a way to survive. Carmen always landed on her feet." Rashid nodded, but his eyes were haunted. "I keep thinking about the things I said to her that last day, the lies I told to make her hate me. I thought I was sparing her a worse fate, but instead I broke her so completely that she felt she had to flee to another continent." Elena reached across the desk and took his hand, surprising herself with the gesture. "You made a mistake," she said gently. "You were trying to protect her in a foolish way. But Carmen knew you loved her, Rashid. I know she did. Love like that doesn't disappear because of cruel words. It might hide, might get wounded, but it stays alive somewhere deep inside." She squeezed his hand. "We're going to find her, and when we do, you'll have a chance to tell her the truth, to apologize and explain. That's all anyone can ask for, a chance to make things right." The call came on a Friday evening, 4 days after Fatima's revelation. Elena and Rashid were having dinner, a habit they had fallen into, eating together in comfortable silence or easy conversation, two lonely people finding unexpected companionship in their shared quest. When Rashid's phone rang, he answered immediately, his eyes meeting Elena's with an intensity that made her heart race. She watched his face as he listened, saw shock and joy and disbelief ripple across his features. "Where?" he said urgently. "Are you certain it's her?" He listened for another moment, then said, "We're coming. Make arrangements immediately. I want to be there tomorrow." He ended the call and turned to Elena with tears streaming down his face. "They found her," he said, his voice breaking. "They found Carmen. She's alive. She's in Tangier, running a small art gallery near the old Medina. She's alive, Elena." Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel wave after wave of emotion crashing over her. Carmen was alive. Her sister was alive. After 7 years of grief and uncertainty, after countless nights of crying and praying and hoping against hope, Carmen was alive and safe in Morocco. She started to cry, deep sobs that came from the core of her being, and Rashid came around the table to embrace her, both of them weeping together. "We're going to see her," he said into her hair. "Tomorrow. I've arranged for a private flight to Tangier. We'll leave at dawn." That night, Elena packed. With shaking hands, what would she say to Carmen? How could she explain these 7 years of silence? 7 years when Carmen must have thought her family had forgotten her, abandoned her. And what about Rashid? Did Carmen still love him, or had time and distance healed her heart? Would she be angry that he had found her, invaded the new life she had built? In the morning, as they drove to the airport through Dubai's quiet, pre-dawn streets, Rashid voiced the same fears. "What if she doesn't want to see me?" he asked quietly. "What if my presence causes her more pain?" Elena looked at this man who had become her friend over these intense weeks of searching. She had learned that he was gentle, despite his power, generous despite his wealth, and deeply wounded by regrets that he carried like stones in his pockets. "Carmen deserves to know the truth," Elena said. "She deserves to understand why you left her, what you sacrificed. After that, it's her choice whether to forgive you or send you away. But she should have that choice, Rashid. She should have all the information before she decides." He nodded slowly, accepting this wisdom. On the plane, neither of them could sit still. Elena watched the world pass beneath them, the desert giving way to the sea, the coast of Saudi Arabia, the Red Sea glittering like hammered copper. Somewhere ahead, her sister was waking up, starting her day, unaware that her past was about to catch up with her present. Tangier was a city of whitewashed buildings and blue doors, of narrow streets that wound through the Medina like a maze, of the smell of mint tea and spices, and the sea. The investigator met them at the airport, a serious Moroccan man named Omar who had done good work. He drove them through the city, explaining what he had learned. She goes by Carmen Martinez still, makes no effort to hide her name, he said. She has lived here for 7 years, arrived with almost no money, and worked her way up. She started by selling her own paintings on the street, then began representing other artists. 3 years ago, she opened a small gallery. She lives alone in an apartment above the gallery, keeps to herself mostly. The neighbors say she is kind but sad, that there is a loneliness about her. Elena's heart ached at this description. Her vibrant, joyful sister had become a lonely woman, shaped by heartbreak into someone quieter. The gallery was in a converted riad, a traditional Moroccan house with a courtyard and rooms opening off it. The walls were painted white, and the name above the door read Casa de Arte in flowing script. Through the windows, Elena could see paintings on the walls, sculptures on pedestals, and there, sitting at a desk in the corner, was Carmen. Even from the street, Elena recognized her, older, thinner, her long dark hair now cut short, but undeniably her sister. Elena's breath caught, and her hand reached for Rashid's. Automatically, he gripped it tightly, his own eyes fixed on Carmen with an expression of such longing and pain that Elena's heart broke for him. "How do we do this?" Elena whispered. "How do I walk in there after 7 years?" Rashid released her hand gently. "Go to her first," he said. "Let her see you. Let her know you've been searching for her. Give her that moment. I'll wait here." Elena approached the door on legs that felt like water. A small bell chimed as she pushed it open, and Carmen looked up from her desk. For a moment she glanced at Elena with the polite interest one gives any customer. Then recognition dawned, and the color drained from her face. "Elena," she whispered, standing so abruptly that her chair fell backward. "Elena, is it really you?" Elena couldn't speak, could only nod as tears streamed down her face. Carmen moved toward her slowly at first, then faster, and then they were in each other's arms, both of them crying, holding each other, as if they might disappear again if they let go. "I thought you were dead," Elena sobbed into her sister's shoulder. "For 7 years. I thought I'd lost you forever." Carmen pulled back to look at her, her own face wet with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said brokenly. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I just couldn't face going home. Couldn't face questions and sympathy and everyone knowing I'd been such a fool." They sat in the gallery's small courtyard, surrounded by potted plants and the sound of a fountain, and Carmen told her story. After Rashid had ended their relationship so coldly, she had fallen apart. She couldn't bear to stay in Dubai, where every street corner held memories of their time together. But she also couldn't face returning to Texas, to Elena's worried questions, to the life she had left behind so hopefully. "I felt like such a failure," Carmen said quietly. "I had been so certain he loved me, so sure we would build a life together. And then, in one conversation, he destroyed all of it. Told me it had all been a game to him. I felt stupid and used, and I couldn't bear the thought of coming home to admit how wrong I'd been. So she had withdrawn all her money, bought a one-way ticket to Morocco on an airline that didn't share records electronically with the major databases, and disappeared into a new life. "Why didn't you call me?" Elena asked, hurt bleeding through her voice. "Why did you let me believe you were dead?" Carmen's face crumpled. "At first, I told myself I would call once I got settled, once I had processed everything. But days turned into weeks, and I was so depressed, Elena. I could barely get out of bed. I was in a bad place, and I didn't want you to see me like that. Then weeks turned into months, and I felt like too much time had passed. How could I explain the silence? How could I make you understand? And part of me," she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper, "part of me wanted to disappear, wanted to become someone new, someone who had never loved and lost so completely. I know it was selfish. I know I hurt you terribly, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just surviving, one day at a time." Elena held her sister's hands and felt the calluses there, the evidence of years of hard work, of building a life from nothing. "I forgive you," she said, and meant it. "I was angry and hurt and terrified. But you're alive, Carmen. You're alive and safe, and that's all that really matters." They talked for hours, catching up on 7 years of separation. Elena told Carmen about Rosa's children, about their old neighborhood, about the house that was almost lost and now might be saved with Elena's new job. Carmen showed Elena her gallery, her apartment upstairs, a simple space filled with art and books, beautiful but lonely. And finally, when the afternoon light was turning golden, Elena said gently, "There's someone outside who needs to see you, someone who has been searching for you just as desperately as I have." Carmen's face went pale. "Rashid?" she whispered. "He's here? He's the one who found you," Elena explained. "I took a job as a housekeeper in his mansion in Dubai. Complete coincidence, though it feels like fate now. I found your photograph hidden in his library, and when I asked him about it, he broke down. Carmen, he's been mourning you for 7 years, just as I have, and when he learned you had disappeared, that you hadn't just gone back to Texas as he thought, he used all his resources to find you. He's been suffering too, living with regrets and grief." Carmen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Rashid waited. "What did he tell you?" she asked quietly. "About why he left you?" Elena explained everything. Rashid's father's threats, his misguided attempt to protect Carmen from ruin and deportation, the cruel words he had spoken to push her away. He thought he was saving you," Elena said. "He was wrong and foolish, but he did it out of love, not cruelty." Carmen was silent for a long moment, processing this information. "For 7 years I believed he never loved me," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I built my whole new life on that belief, that I had been foolish and naive, that I had imagined a connection that wasn't real. And now you're telling me it was all real, that he loved me enough to let me go?" She turned to Elena with tears streaming down her face. "How do I face him? How do I even begin to untangle all of this?" Elena stood and embraced her sister, the same way we all face difficult things, with courage and honesty and an open heart. "You don't have to decide anything right now. You don't have to forgive him or take him back or do anything except hear his truth. Listen to what he has to say and then decide what you want." Carmen nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. She walked to the gallery's small mirror and smoothed her hair with shaking hands, and Elena saw her sister gathering the same courage she had always possessed, the bravery that had allowed her to leave everything behind and start anew in a foreign country. "Bring him in," Carmen said quietly. Elena went to the door and beckoned to Rashid, who'd been standing across the street, patient as stone. He crossed to the gallery with slow, deliberate steps, as if approaching something sacred. When he entered, his eyes found Carmen immediately, and the look that passed between them was electric with years of longing and pain and unspoken words. "Hello, Carmen," Rashid said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I have so much to tell you, if you're willing to listen." Carmen stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her, and nodded. "I'm listening," she said. Elena quietly excused herself, sensing that this moment belonged to Carmen and Rashid alone. She went upstairs to Carmen's apartment and stood on the small balcony, looking out over the rooftops of Tangier, listening to the call to prayer echoing across the city. Below, in the gallery, 2 people who had loved and lost each other were finally speaking the truths they should have spoken 7 years ago. Elena didn't know what would happen between them. She didn't know if Carmen could forgive Rashid's abandonment, even knowing his reasons. She didn't know if Rashid could forgive himself for causing so much pain, but she knew that truth, however painful, was always better than the comfortable lies they had all been living. Carmen deserved to know she had been truly loved. Rashid deserved the chance to apologize and explain, and both of them deserved the opportunity to choose their own path forward, armed with complete information. An hour passed, then another. Elena made tea in Carmen's small kitchen, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. She had just settled into a chair with a book when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Both Carmen and Rashid appeared in the doorway, their faces tear-stained but calmer, as if a great storm had passed. They sat down with Elena, and Carmen took her sister's hand. "Rashid has told me everything," she said quietly, "about his father's threats, about the choice he thought he was making, about the 7 years he's spent regretting it. And I've told him about my life here, about the healing I've done, about the person I've become. She looked at Rashid with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Not love, not yet, but not hatred either. Something more complex. I need time, Carmen said. I'm not the same person I was 7 years ago, and neither is he. We can't just pick up where we left off. Rashid nodded, his face serious. I understand completely. I don't expect forgiveness, Carmen. I don't expect anything except the chance to prove, through my actions over time, that I have learned from my mistakes, that I have grown into someone who would never make such a cowardly choice again. He stood, preparing to leave. I'll return to Dubai and leave you in peace. But if you ever need anything at all, please know that every resource I have is at your disposal. No strings attached, just one human being trying to make amends to another. He turned to Elena. Thank you for bringing me here, for giving me the chance to finally speak my truth. Whatever happens, I'm grateful. But Carmen stood as well, stopping him with a hand on his arm. Don't go back to Dubai yet, she said softly. Stay in Tangier for a few days. Let me show you the city I've come to love, the life I've built. Let's talk more, as friends if nothing else. Let's see if we can build something new from the ruins of what was. Over the next week, something beautiful and fragile began to grow in the Moroccan sunshine. Rashid took a suite at a nearby hotel, and each day he would visit the gallery, where Carmen would close early and take him walking through the Medina. Elena often accompanied them, sometimes lagging behind to give them space, sometimes joining their conversations about art and poetry and the strange paths life takes us down. She watched Carmen begin to soften, watched Rashid become younger somehow, less burdened by his wealth and responsibilities. They were learning each other again, but as different people this time, wiser, scarred by experience, but also more authentic. Carmen showed Rashid her favorite spots in the city, a cafe where old men played chess, a rooftop where you could watch the sun set over the Strait of Gibraltar, a bookshop where the owner knew her by name and saved books he thought she would like. One evening, as the three of them sat on Carmen's small balcony, drinking mint tea and watching the stars emerge, Carmen told a story. When I first arrived in Morocco, she said, I was so broken I could barely function. I spent my first month in a cheap hostel, crying and sleeping and trying to figure out how to keep living. One day I was walking by the sea, and I saw an old woman selling paintings she had made. They were crude, simple things, but there was such joy in them. I stopped to look, and she smiled at me and said something in Arabic I didn't understand, but I understood her gesture. She was offering to teach me to paint, for free, just because she saw that I was sad and painting makes people happy. Carmen smiled at the memory. She taught me for 6 months, until she passed away. She never knew that she saved my life, that her kindness gave me a reason to keep going. Rashid listened with tears in his eyes. I wish I had been there to help you through that dark time, he said quietly. I wish my cowardice hadn't put you in a position where you had to rely on the kindness of strangers. Carmen reached over and took his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact since his arrival. But that's the thing, Rashid. That darkness made me who I am now. It taught me resilience and independence. It taught me that I could survive the worst heartbreak and come out the other side. I'm not saying I'm grateful for the pain, but I'm grateful for who I became because of it. She looked at him seriously. If we're going to try again, and I'm not saying we will, but if we do, it has to be with the people we are now, not the people we were then. You can't try to protect me from life's hardships, and I can't expect you to be perfect. We have to be honest, even when it's hard. On their 8th day in Tangier, Elena announced that she needed to return to Dubai, at least temporarily. She had responsibilities there, a job that Rashid had arranged through an agency, a contract to fulfill. More than that, she sensed that Carmen and Rashid needed time alone, without her as a buffer and witness. Will you come back? Carmen asked, embracing her sister tightly. Always, Elena promised. Now that I've found you again, I'm not letting you disappear. Maybe I'll split my time between Dubai and here. Rashid has already offered to extend my employment indefinitely, with the understanding that I'll visit you regularly. She pulled back to look at Carmen seriously. Be careful with your heart, little sister, but also be brave enough to let yourself hope again. Not every love story gets a second chance. Carmen nodded. her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for never giving up on me, for searching all those years, for coming halfway around the world, for a job that just happened to put you in the right place at the right time." Elena flew back to Dubai alone, leaving Carmen and Rashid to navigate their complicated reunion. As the plane lifted off from Tangier, she looked down at the white city spreading along the coast and thought about the strange turns life takes. 3 months ago, she'd been a lonely widow in San Antonio, barely making ends meet, mourning a sister she believed was dead. Now she was flying between continents, had found Carmen alive and healing, and had gained an unexpected friend in Rashid. Back in Dubai, the mansion felt different to Elena, no longer a prison of marble and gold, but a home where she was valued and respected. Rashid had left instructions with Mrs. Amira to give Elena complete freedom to come and go as she pleased, to arrange her schedule around visits to Morocco. "You're family now," Mrs. Amira told her warmly. The Sheikh made that very clear. Over the following months, Elena settled into a new rhythm. She would work in Dubai for 3 weeks, maintaining Rashid's home with care and pride, and then spend a week in Tangier with Carmen. She watched from a distance as her sister and Rashid slowly, carefully rebuilt their relationship. They moved cautiously, like people who had been burned and were wary of fire, but there was undeniable tenderness between them. Rashid would fly to Morocco every few weeks, staying for days at a time. He helped Carmen expand her gallery, using his business acumen to increase her reach without overwhelming her vision. He learned Arabic alongside her, both of them taking lessons from a patient tutor in the Medina. He never pushed for more than Carmen was willing to give, content to earn back her trust one day at a time. And gradually, Elena saw her sister's guarded expression soften, saw joy returning to her eyes. A year after their reunion in Tangier, Carmen made a decision. She called Elena one evening, her voice trembling with emotion and excitement. "I'm going to marry him," she said. "Rashid asked me again last night, and I said yes. I know it seems fast after everything, but Elena, I love him. I never stopped loving him even when I thought I hated him. And this time, we're going into it with our eyes open, with all our scars visible, with the wisdom that only pain can teach you." Elena felt joy burst through her chest like sunrise. "I'm so happy for you, Carmen." "When?" Carmen laughed, a sound of pure delight that Elena hadn't heard in years. 6 months from now. We want to do it properly this time, with both our families present, in a place that's special to both of us. We're thinking of having the ceremony here in Tangier, blending Moroccan and American traditions. Will you help me plan it?" The next 6 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Elena found herself coordinating between 3 countries, helping Carmen choose a dress in Casablanca, working with Rashid's family, who had come to accept and even embrace Carmen after his father's death, and bringing Rosa and her family to Morocco to meet the aunt they thought they'd lost forever. The family reunion was tearful and beautiful. Rosa, who had been only 17 when Carmen disappeared, was now a mother of 2, and watching Carmen meet her nieces for the first time brought Elena to tears. "I'm sorry I missed so much," Carmen whispered to Rosa, holding her tight. "I'm sorry I ran away instead of facing my pain." Rosa, wise beyond her years, simply said, "You're here now. That's what matters." The wedding preparations revealed just how much Carmen had integrated into Moroccan life. She spoke Arabic fluently now, had close friendships with local artists and shop owners, understood the customs and traditions with deep respect. The wedding took place on a perfect spring day in a riad overlooking the sea. Carmen wore a dress that blended Western and Moroccan elements, white silk with delicate embroidery in geometric patterns, her hands decorated with henna designs. Rashid wore traditional white robes, his face radiant with happiness. The ceremony itself honored both Islamic and Christian traditions, with prayers in Arabic and English, with vows that acknowledged their difficult past and their hopeful future. Elena stood beside her sister, watching as Carmen and Rashid exchanged rings and promises, and she thought about the long journey that had brought them all to this moment. 7 years of pain, of searching, of separate healings that had to happen before they could come together. As the sun set over Tangier, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Elena realized that some love stories don't follow straight lines. Some have to break before they can be mended into something even stronger than the original. 2 years after the wedding, Elena sat in the garden of Carmen and Rashid's home in Dubai, a new house they had built together, smaller than Rashid's old mansion, filled with art and light and laughter. Carmen's gallery had expanded to include locations in both Tangier and Dubai, and she split her time between the two cities, as comfortable in both worlds now. Elena had moved permanently to Dubai, living in a comfortable apartment that Rashid had set up for her near their home, though she spent most evenings with Carmen and Rashid and their new baby daughter Layla. Elena held her granddaughter, though technically great-niece. The baby called her Grandma Elena and marveled at the new life cradled in her arms, a child who represented hope and healing, who would grow up knowing both her American and Emirati heritage, who would never know the pain that had preceded her arrival. "I've been thinking about writing it all down," Carmen said, settling into the chair beside Elena, watching her daughter with eyes full of love. "Our story, I mean. The separation and the reunion, not for publication or anything, just for Layla, so someday she'll understand what her parents went through to find their way to each other." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "It's a story worth preserving, a reminder that sometimes the longest way round is the shortest way home." Rashid joined them, bringing tea and sweets, and sat on Carmen's other side, his hand finding hers automatically. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, three people who had been strangers and were now family, watching the sunset paint the Dubai sky in familiar colors. Elena thought about all the decisions that had led her here, accepting a job she had been afraid to take, searching for truth instead of accepting comfortable lies, forgiving those who deserved forgiveness and helping others find their way to redemption. "Do you ever regret it?" Rashid asked Elena quietly. "Taking that job, finding the photograph, upending your whole life?" Elena looked at him, at Carmen, at the baby sleeping in her arms, and smiled. "Not for a single moment," she said. "Sometimes we're put exactly where we need to be, even if we don't understand why at the time. I came to Dubai thinking I was simply earning money for Rosa's surgery, but really I was being guided toward a truth that needed to be discovered, toward a reunion that needed to happen. We all had to walk through darkness, separately and together, to reach this light." She stood, carefully placing Layla in Carmen's arms, and looked out at the garden where butterflies danced among the jasmine. Every story of love is also a story of loss and finding, of breaking and mending. We just had to travel further than most to learn that lesson. And as the call to prayer echoed across the city and the stars began to emerge in the twilight sky, Elena knew that she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the family that love, perseverance, and the grace of second chances had created.